Like a lot of people nowadays feel disenfranchised from voting. And I think you're trying to remedy that and it's misguided.
I think a lot of people underestimate the difference between a Democrat and Republican administration right now, yeah, especially under Trump. So, in the United States, there's going to be an election at the end of this year between Trump and Biden, well, most likely. At the moment, it seems like there's a bit of a coin flip between who's going to win. Biden is not doing very well in the polls, but also Trump has about 43 million criminal charges between now and then, some of which might actually reach a final verdict. So there's a good chance Trump, even if he wins, he might have to just get sentenced and spend the next 300 years in the electric chair, because that's what they do in America. I've seen a lot of left-leaning people on the internet, as you have too, saying that people are talking about not voting at all because, not just because they dismiss the lesser of two evils thing or anything like that. It's not even really to do with domestic opinion anymore. It's to do with their actions on Palestine, their behaviors towards Palestine. And often I hear people saying there's no difference, or at most Biden is like the lesser of two genocides. Okay, I don't buy either of those arguments, but rather than making that argument in particular, I'm just going to show you some of the differences. I'm going to give you a bit of a rundown between the differences between Trump and Biden when it comes to Israel and Palestine. So we'll look at their general opinions on Israel and Palestine, like as American presidents, their views towards the peace process or just like general conduct. And then we're also going to talk about the ways that they have approached the war in particular since October 7th. So starting with Trump, Trump, as far as American presidents go, is an absolute horror show. Let's see what Trump did. Trump moved the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem after recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital. This matters because if there's going to be any kind of peace process that's brokered by the United States, at least the most realistic one that is agreed upon by most countries that actually have power in the region and have a stake in the region, would say that it would be two states. And part of that two-state solution is East Jerusalem goes to Palestine. It becomes the capital for the West Bank. Now, Trump has very symbolically killed that with this. He also actually just tried to kill it in reality, because US presidents over time have offered various different peace processes, Clinton parameters, for example, being the big one. Trump had a peace plan as well that he proposed, which effectively would have turned Palestine into a Bantustan. Like, he appeased the Israeli right further than any president ever has, I think, in living memory, or at least in my lifetime. This would have been the Palestinian state under Trump. He would have allowed so many of these settlements just to stay in place. The land swaps were much more limited. This is a mess. Look at it. It's like a leopard print. And the fine details of what this actually involves is even worse. He basically gives up East Jerusalem. Now, there are speeches where he does say that Palestinians should have a capital in Jerusalem. He does say that in speeches. But do you know what he means by that? I didn't actually know what he meant by that contradictory statement, because, well, what he actually means is, he doesn't mean East Jerusalem as it's understood. This plan actually has a suggestion in it to give up one neighborhood on the outskirts of East Jerusalem called Abu Dis to the Palestinians, just a little neighborhood outside Jerusalem. And the suggestion from the plan is that Palestinians rename it to Al-Quds, because Al-Quds was the Arabic name for Jerusalem. That was the plan. The plan was to give them the Jerusalem we have at home. And it's worse than that. See, here at the Jordan Valley, for a very long time, the Israeli right especially have said that they can never give up the Jordan Valley because it's too important for security. It does have some security significance for Israel, but Clinton, at the time of the peace process in the 2000s, accepted that this significance was massively exaggerated. So the Jordan Valley, which Trump wants to give to Israel, in the Clinton parameters, it was going to go to Israel for only 6 years. It was going to be there for a 6-year interim period and then transferred to the Palestinians. Trump recognized the Golan Heights, the annexed part from Syria that Israel occupied in 1967. They were the first US government to do so in the world. Another part of this process was it involves a population transfer. It involved a fairly small, albeit, but an ethnic cleansing. It involved a population transfer of Palestinians who live in the Triangle area near the West Bank, including Kfar Qasim, like villages that were victims of massacres in the 50s. Yeah, it involved a population transfer. Also, in the Golan Heights, he they actually unveiled a settlement there called Trump Heights because they were so happy about Trump recognizing the annexation. Yeah, this was Trump's peace plan. It was basically selling out Palestinians. It wasn't a peace plan at all because Palestinians were never going to accept it, but this was what Trump pushes. Whenever you hear Trump in speeches saying that we had a tremendous peace plan, we would have ended the conflict by now, this is what he means. No East Jerusalem, no contiguous West Bank, little tunnel, apparently a tunnel linking Gaza and the West Bank, bits of desert in exchange, I guess, and a population transfer. Okay. Even if you're dissatisfied with Biden being very much a two-state solution, would probably along the lines of the Clinton parameters advocate, compare that to this. I mean, okay. And that's not all Trump did. Trump also cut aid. The United States does actually give quite a bit of aid to the Palestinians. Trump cut $230 million of it, including $150 million for UNRWA, as well as $75 million for economic and developmental assistance. Biden resumed this cut. He undid this. He resumed this funding in 2021. He restored it. So even that's a difference in itself. Biden's approach to the general conflict, well, most people would say that Biden, and I would agree with this, and other Democrats, even Obama especially, have generally only paid lip service to a two-state solution. They just kind of say it. They say the settlements are an obstacle, and that's it. It seems to be that this war has finally stirred up, at the very least, a conversation amongst the Democrats about moving beyond that. In January in this year, Blinken asked the State Department to start reviewing options to possibly recognize a Palestinian state. Recognizing a Palestinian state, by the way, is, for a Western country, is a big, big step. This was Corbyn. Corbyn ran on this platform. He was going to recognize a Palestinian state if he came into office. I think Bernie Sanders had something similar. But also the fact that Americans are doing this, it's just flirting right now, basically. But the fact that they're even reviewing this option is, compared to the last 10, 15, 20 years, is quite big. It's also inspired changes around the world as well, in different countries. David Cameron, of all people, has floated a similar idea in the UK. And there is also quite a sincere discussion from the Biden administration about using any pause in fighting, whether it's humanitarian ceasefire or permanent, using any pause in the fighting to coordinate and plan for reconstruction and future governance with the Saudis and the Qataris. Like, there is actually, thanks to the Democrat initiative, there is actually some incentive towards looking beyond what might happen to Palestinian sovereignty after the war. On top of that, there's actually, you can call that just lip service, so this is just starting, but there have also been actions in a positive direction. He has placed sanctions on Israeli settlers and outposts. So far, I think 3 citizens who are settlers have fallen under these sanctions, 2 of whom led the riots in Huwara, that village that was attacked, and quite a lot of it actually burnt down in last year. But it didn't stop there. They also actually sanctioned an outpost, 2 outposts, the outposts that are actually considered illegal by Israel as well. Yeah, the United States has placed sanctions on 2 of them. The United States has never done that before. They've never sanctioned an outpost. And that's actually quite significant right now because in the West Bank since October 7th, outposters have been working round the clock to illegally build roads, essentially dirt tracks, linking them to already existing settlements. And what that does is they're basically cementing their presence. And what can happen sometimes is if an outpost is there for long enough and it's built up and it's actually like buildings and houses with like power lines and water and electricity and everything, then and they're linked to an existing settlement and they've actually got employment relations, then what happens is Israel will just normalize the outpost and make it part of the settlement. And then all the land that's in between the outposts and the settlement become part of the settlement as well. So outposts, when it comes to settlement expansion, is it's very intentional. It's done very calculated. It's very strategic. They try to get particular areas where they can get as much land of the most value as possible by doing it. They have been accelerating that massively since October 7th because there's just less and less energy there to stop them. Yeah, it's really, really bad. So the fact that there's actually action being taken against that now is, albeit small, good step in the right direction. The European Union is actually taking inspiration. That's another thing. The other significance about American presidents doing stuff like this is that other countries often follow. Hungary initially resisted the European Union taking action against settlements, but they've recently backed down. So it looks like Europe's going to go in the same direction. And even in his administration as well, the tone shift is it's quite different. Chuck Schumer, this speech I just saw just recently, he did a few things that were they don't sound like much, but in the context of American politics, they're actually fairly big. He described Netanyahu as a major obstacle to peace. Normally, they would say settlements are an obstacle to peace, right? But actually calling the sitting prime minister, who they're having meetings with, a major obstacle, that's actually, again, a little bit of a newer step. And he actually also called for elections in Israel, which is a bit of a taboo for a democracy to tell another democracy to hold an election. But yeah, he's done it. And Biden, when asked, simply said it was a good speech. He didn't disown any of it. And this coming from Chuck Schumer as well, the Senate Majority Leader. Chuck Schumer is a Jewish senator from New York. He has a very centrist reputation. Actually, his opinion on Israel have been described as hawkish in the past. So I always say this about politicians. Politicians, it's good to remember, are not leaders. They're not. Some of them do have their own idealist positions and they pursue what they actually believe, even if it's a bit unpopular every now and then. But they're also followers. They're followers of public opinion. And it seems to be that they are responding in part to public opinion. They're never going to respond as much as the extreme radical left want them to, because if they do that, they'll lose moderates. And there are a lot more moderates in America than there are socialists and communists. So, it is what it is. That's what you get for living in a democracy, eh? So that's their views on the peace process. Biden seems to have some commitment to, or some interest in moving towards a settlement that would actually be agreed upon by Palestinians, and in a way that actually might involve, or does involve, some tangible action against Israeli excesses and Israeli aggression towards, especially like the West Bank. Then, well, Trump wants to just sell it all out. Trump wants to hand over all the settlement blocks. Trump wants to give up East Jerusalem. He wants a unified Jerusalem. He wants to compensate Palestinians with a pound shop Jerusalem. There's a pretty big difference there, and especially if we're talking about after, like, post-war, when Israel has, if hypothetically Hamas is defeated and they lose governing and military power, then if we're in a position after that war when Israel has no excuse anymore, when they run out of excuses, are you going to want a Trump in office for that situation, or Biden? Like, I personally would rather a Biden. Okay, just saying. Let's say for war conduct. Okay. Trump hasn't actually spoken much about the war. He spoke in the October 7th period, like around a week after that. He went quiet all the way until this month. What did he say at the beginning? Well, first of all, let's look at what he believes in the past. Trump, to some degree or another, supports collective punishment. He likes collective punishment. In 2015, talking about ISIS, he gave this really interesting statement that was about saying that I'll just give you the quote. The other thing with the terrorists is you have to take out their families. When you get these terrorists, you have to take out their families. They care about their lives. Don't kid yourself. When they say they don't care about their lives, you have to take out their families. It's like, what the fuck? And okay, he did walk this back a little bit 4 months later, but when he came into office, he more or less didn't go completely away from this idea of collective punishment and extreme aggression. In Afghanistan, he relaxed the rules of engagement for airstrikes in 2017, and lo and behold, the number of civilian casualties skyrocketed. In 2019, I think 700 civilians were killed in airstrikes, which was more than any other year since the very beginning of the war. He loosened restrictions on the use of landmines in 2020, which had been placed in by Obama in 2014. He is a military hawk. He is a hyper-aggressive military hawk. When it comes to ceasefire, temporary or permanent, Trump has not said anything about a ceasefire. At the start of the war, he got in trouble for saying that Hezbollah were very smart. But most of his rhetoric about the war itself is mostly just all roads leading to this would never have happened if I were president. He says that a lot. On October 7th, he simply said 11th, sorry. He said he would fully support Israel defeating, dismantling, and permanently destroying the terrorist group Hamas. He also said that Hamas will burn forever in the eternal pit of hell, which, as far as rhetoric goes, generally not what you're not encouraged, because generally if you use rhetoric like this, as we see with Israeli leaders, is you are at the very least giving a kind of orange light, if not a green light, to kind of step a bit beyond. He then went completely silent until about March, when Israel was planning to invade Rafah. And his answer to that, simply, you've got to finish the problem. When every other country, including Biden, as we'll find out, when everyone else, including Biden, was very hesitant and saying, if you're going to go into Rafah, like, you can't do this without a plan for civilian evacuation. You can't do it. You have to have a concrete plan in place to ensure civilian protection at least as much as you can before going in, which Israel initially wasn't going to do. They were going to go in on the 10th. They have held back now, and you've noticed actually because of the pressure from not just Biden, but also European countries, is now Netanyahu's rhetoric is very much, we're going to protect the civilians. We have a plan in place. We have people who are discussing getting people evacuated. We're discussing making sure that we don't have a massive number of people dying in the crossfire. Like the rhetoric has changed a lot compared to all the Amalek shit from the start of the war. He was asked questions about the ceasefire in this address. He just didn't answer them. He's not interested. He doesn't have any interest in a ceasefire. To Netanyahu, his message was simply, I think you have to finish it up and do it quickly and get back to the world of peace. Yeah, Trump is very much, he's a hawk. He wants to, his entire approach is kill the bad guys as quickly as possible. Civilian collateral, deal with it. But mostly, in basically all these addresses, mostly Trump's big message is that if I were president, this wouldn't have happened. That's his big message. It's about himself. Biden. Let's have a look at some of the things Biden did since October 7th. First of all, one of his first things that he did was that he pressured Israel to resume the water supply to southern Gaza. If you remember, around October 9th, Israel shut their water supply off to Gaza. About 9% of the total water supply of Gaza. It's like 3 pipes. It's about 9% of Gaza's water. After a few very long and intense meetings with Biden, they reopened the first pipe on October 15th, and then the second one at the end of the month to the south of Gaza. The fact that Israel did this at all is insane. Like, this is criminal. Like, you should not do this. But thankfully, at the same time that Trump is talking about burning them in hell or whatever, Biden was working to get that water supply back on immediately, as soon as possible. And his rhetoric at the time was very much, the Palestinian people are suffering greatly as well. We mourn the loss of innocent Palestinian lives like the entire world. The people of Gaza need food, water, medicine, and shelter. So that was very early on in the war. He also, at the beginning of the war, he dissuaded Israel from going to war with Hezbollah after October 7th because some people, I think especially was it Yoav Gallant, wanted to do that. They actually wanted to declare full war against Hezbollah at the same time as Hamas, which would have meant, no, I don't think providing them water is criminal. I think stopping the water is criminal. Did I misword that? Okay, whatever. If Israel went to war with Hezbollah after October 7th, that would have been it would have been a disaster for Israel for one, because they don't like their Hezbollah is much of a taller order to get rid of than Hamas. Hezbollah are a lot stronger than Hamas, and they're also in a country, not just an enclave. It also would have been a disaster for Lebanese people. I think in the last Lebanese-Israeli war, which lasted just about a month, barely over a month, 1 million Lebanese people were displaced. Like quite a few thousand people died as well, in not that much time. The fact that they were trying to do this, or that they were considering doing this after October 7th, is absolutely batshit. And it turns out there was actually a bit more to it than just them talking about it. Apparently, according to US officials, the Israelis actually had, because of bad intelligence, they believed that a Hezbollah attack was imminent, that there was actually consideration to preemptively hit because they thought that Hezbollah was going to launch a full-scale assault, because they believed that Hezbollah was behind the Hamas attack, that they were actually coordinating. Thankfully, it turns out that they were wrong, but if they had believed that at the time and actually acted on it, that would have been an absolute disaster. And that's what the aircraft carriers were about as well. The ones that Biden placed in the Mediterranean was to deter Hezbollah from doing that if they were considering it. And yeah, this was a lot of the conversations between Biden and Netanyahu at the time were very much insisting that Israel doesn't do this. Thankfully, they didn't. So, yeah. Biden, unlike Trump, has repeatedly pushed for a ceasefire. A temporary one, admittedly. A 6-week proposal was the most recent one. There have been about 4 or 5 proposals right now. One of them actually went through. The other ones have either been shot down by Israel, Hamas, or both. This 6-week proposal, which was to allow flow of aid and to release the most vulnerable hostages, apparently this one was mostly accepted by Israel. They wanted, their sticking point, however, was apparently that Hamas didn't agree to a defined category of vulnerable hostages. And this was the one that failed to go in before Ramadan. And again, if you're saying again that this isn't enough, that humanitarian ceasefires are not enough, it should be a full ceasefire. The reason that an American president can't really do that is because Netanyahu and Hamas have they can't agree on it. They can't agree on anything. Israel only would do a permanent ceasefire if Hamas surrendered and gave up power. Hamas will only accept a permanent ceasefire if Israel leaves Gaza completely and just unilaterally withdraws. And given the fact that they're saying they want Israel to leave Gaza permanently for a ceasefire, whilst their leaders are going on TV saying that they want October 7th to happen 1,000,000 times, then yeah, neither side is going to give up on that. Anyway, and a president can't force that from either end. As for the aid situation, he implemented the humanitarian sea corridor from Cyprus to Gaza. I think this is the first ships are actually ready to go with this. This is quite recent. He constantly reiterates Israel's need to allow humanitarian aid workers to move through Gaza. This is what him saying it now, addressing the bottleneck issue.
Some leading international efforts to get more humanitarian assistance to Gaza. Tonight, I'm directing the U.S. military to lead an emergency mission to establish a temporary pier in the Mediterranean on the coast of Gaza that can receive large shipments carrying food, water, medicine, and temporary shelters. No U.S. boots will be on the ground. A temporary pier will enable a massive increase in the amount of humanitarian assistance getting into Gaza every day. And Israel must do its part. Israel must allow more aid into Gaza to ensure humanitarian workers aren't caught in the crossfire.
Okay. And by the way, Trump never talks about aid. He doesn't talk about aid. He doesn't talk about ceasefires. He says, get the job done. And he says, if I were president, this would never have happened. That's what Trump says, okay? And also, more recently, he pushed people will say that he drew a red line. I don't think there was a red line. That was a comment that the White House didn't really endorse. I think it might have been a misspeak or a hot mic or something. I don't know. But the red line thing wasn't true. But what he did do was that he quite vocally pushed against the idea of Israel going into Rafah without a plan for civilians, which it seemed like they were going to do because their initial deadline was March 10th. But then by March 12th, they're talking about how they're developing a plan to evacuate civilians, which kind of suggests that they were going to do it without one before. But yeah, thankfully, again, pressure not just from Biden, but I think many, many governments in Europe were saying the same thing. The fact that they were going to do this is absolutely batshit. Also, this was the Israelis also, they did approve the aid corridor from Cyprus to Gaza. They did approve that, obviously, because it makes their jobs easier, like someone else doing the aid thing for them. But Biden nonetheless said, or yeah, the American officials nonetheless said, we're not waiting for the Israelis. Like, yeah. I think they were going to do it with or without Israel approving it or helping them or anything. Yeah. And it seems like now, because of those warnings, that they're still going to go into Rafah. They don't think they're going to finish the war without going into Rafah, but their deadline seems to have been pushed now. I think it's Friday was the last I heard. They're going to do it on the 22nd. But I'm hoping if they're doing it with an evacuation plan, I don't even know how that's going to work. Are they either going to evacuate to camps in the Sinai? People are talking about camps being built in the Sinai, or if they're going to be evacuated to the middle of Gaza, like a round trip. I don't have no idea. But the fact that there is some kind of plan supposedly going in place now, compared to the fact that they were going to go in without one, that doesn't make any sense to me. Anyway, whatever. I also got some MISC stuff here, I guess. But yeah, the pressure that Biden is putting on Netanyahu compared to Trump is just like he's actually doing things to try and, as much as he can, to keep Netanyahu within, I guess, like the rules of war, or within like what is, or at least to minimize humanitarian, like the impending humanitarian crisis as much as can be done. The problem is that Trump doesn't say anything about this. And because Biden's concern about the humanitarian crisis is so pressing, like they've been falling out quite a few times as well. I think Biden has reportedly called Netanyahu an asshole at least 3 times in these talks. He was caught in a hot mic saying that he and Netanyahu need to have a come to Jesus meeting. Like Netanyahu's Jewish, but okay. But yeah, that's more or less Biden's position compared to Trump's. Biden does not disagree that Israel has a right to go to war with Hamas. He believes that Hamas gave Israel casus belli, cause for war, in October 7th. And his opinion, despite that, seems to be the case that has been very much pushing that Palestinian civilians are not Hamas. And if you're going to go to war with Hamas, you can't just go to war with them without concern for civilian lives. And it seems to be that Biden's concern for civilian lives is far greater than Netanyahu's, and that's why they've been the crux of their falling out. Whereas Trump has basically just said, green light, do what you want. But yeah, and I know how much this has to do with the protests or the pressure. I would argue it actually does have a bit to do with it. Because, again, presidents care about public opinion. I know people are saying that this might have something to do with the uncommitted vote in Michigan. I don't know if I buy that necessarily. The uncommitted vote in Michigan just recently was 13%. But when Obama ran unopposed, Biden was opposed in this one. When Obama ran unopposed, the uncommitted vote was 11%. So you could also argue that the 13%, the 2024 one was a much bigger turnout. So I don't know. You can take it or leave it. But I do think if you are one of those people who is considering that you don't want to vote for either Trump or Biden because you don't think it'll make any difference, or because you think you're choosing the lesser of 2 genocides or whatever, like at the end of the day, one of these presidents actually cares about humanitarian concerns and cares about implementing measures that could potentially save like thousands of lives, because that's what these humanitarian corridors and temporary 6-week ceasefires and all that's what they do. They save people from starving to death, right? Or dying of disease or anything like that, which is a very, very, very high risk of that being the case for thousands of people in the north of Gaza right now. The situation in the north of Gaza is like it's dire, it's desperate, and the fact that you have one president who actually cares about that and is trying to do things to alleviate it, whereas you have another one who just wants to win the war as quickly as possible. Okay. And the fact that after the war, one of these people actually has some moderately feasible approach to Palestinian sovereignty after the matter, whereas the other one basically just wants to appease the Israeli right more than any other president has ever done. So, yeah, I don't know. Those are, I'd say, the significant differences between Trump and Biden on Israel-Palestine. You can take it or leave it. If you're convinced, hey, good for you. If you're not, oh well, maybe next time. Okay, cool. The thing about Lebanon in the beginning of the war isn't really how you described it. That's what the article was saying. It said that Israel was convinced. I don't know if Israel would have actually gone in, but it seems like they were convinced that Hezbollah was planning an attack and that they were working with Hamas to do October 7th. Israeli reporters said it wasn't Biden. Oh, okay. No, I don't know if it was Biden, but even then, if there's a risk of something happening and the president is trying to contribute to stopping it, even if it's a decision they would have come to by themselves, I think that still says something about Biden, no? They decide, yeah, that's what I'm saying though. But what I'm saying is that Trump, I don't think Trump would be on the phone to Netanyahu 3 times a day making the case that it shouldn't happen. Because again, that's just like, what's the argument there then? The argument I'm making is that Biden has a different approach from Trump, that Biden encourages restraint, that Biden encourages not taking rash actions like ironically, like America post 9/11. Okay? I don't know. I think that's but I'm hoping to do more segments like that in the future. More of these kind of just like smaller argument segments. Come to Jesus is normal in the South. I know it is. There's something funny about saying it to a Jew, right? That's just, I don't know. It's not like voting is part of the problem, but Loner is too incompetent to recognize that. Oh, Cosmic Fox, you're more than welcome to come into Discord and tell me why I'm too incompetent to recognize that voting isn't the problem. It's a problem. It's an important thing to do. Okay. Hello.
Hi there. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm a little bit upset with your coverage.
Okay.
It's not the end of the world for me, right? You do you. I just think it's kind of one-dimensional.
Okay.
So, like, for example, voting, like a lot of people nowadays feel disenfranchised from voting. And I think you're trying to remedy that, and it's misguided by getting people to think of this as a single vote. Was it called single issue vote? Like, God damn it, I can't think of the words to use here. But like, you're thinking of people as single issue voters, and so you're trying to be like, vote for Biden because Palestine, except Democrat. Like, you're also telling people to vote for Democrats.
I don't think it's a single issue case with Palestine. I'm just saying that there are some people who seem to be not interested in voting Biden because of Palestine. I'm just going to look at here the difference between the two of them on this one issue. It's not like I would ever say that Palestine's the only reason. Domestic issues are a big part of it as well. I've spoken about abortion. I've spoken about education. I've spoken about immigration. I've spoken about quite a few things other than just even trans rights, actually. I've spoken about that more so than just Palestine.
So this is particularly a way to remedy people who don't want to vote for Biden. Just so I'm clear.
This is already a way. What do you mean?
No, but like, this is your approach. This is why you're doing this, is to remedy that fact.
Yeah, I think a lot of people underestimate the difference between a Democrat and Republican administration right now. Yeah, especially under Trump. Yeah.
Do you think maybe you're like limiting people by only giving them 2 options?
I'm not giving them 2 options. There are only 2 options.
Well, there's independence.
They're not options.
Well, according to you.
According to the fact that they're not options, they're going to get like, what, 5% of the vote? Which independent would I mean, if there's an independent I could vouch for who I think would be far better than the other 2 and who has a chance of showing that and achieving that.
Okay, sure. In this election, I'll concede that there are no viable independents as far as we know.
Okay.
In general, though, like, if I recall you saying politicians aren't necessarily leaders. They tend to care more about what their voters think, right?
In part, they're also idealists. They might sometimes
And
do
there's
things that they believe in. Yeah.
and let's be clear, that's not as true for a president in their second term because you can only have 2 terms.
Hmm.
And this would be Biden's second term.
So what do we think he's going to do? He's just going to make all these promises and then just ditch them all?
Oh, I think he's just way more likely to. Why would we expect him to be better faith the second time around?
Because presidents also care about their legacy. They also care about their party to some degree. They care about midterms.
Sure. I don't know how much we can factor in legacy into the equation here because nobody really knows how much, Biden's handling of the Israel v. Palestine conflict is really going to, reflect on him down the road. It's probably domestic policies that do that more than anything.
It depends, because if he feels like, yeah, I probably agree. Probably the domestic thing will matter. But again, Clinton in his second term on the way out was till the very end trying to pursue peace with Israel-Palestine. He didn't need to do that. Like,
Well, maybe he was an ideologue in a sense.
maybe. And I don't see why
So,
Biden wouldn't be. Like, yeah.
so my big thing is, do you like you said well, this is kind of the consequence of living in a democracy, right? Is that fair to take? Is that fair to kind of use that to reason against you for a second?
Yeah.
Um, do you think voters, if they did end up voting for third party, would end up putting pressure on these politicians who care more about what they think than their internal ideology?
If that third party could actually offer something quite substantial that was quite popular, like if there's a third party that's getting like 10-15% of the vote, maybe. The problem is that when people who are more fringe, especially like social and communists, feel like they're pressuring politicians to move in their direction, they seem to acknowledge that the more a politician moves in their direction, the further away they move from moderates. And there are a lot more moderates than there are fringe people. So I think you'd have to have a pretty big third party to do that.
It seems kind of like you're putting the fringe left into a box that can only either vote to change things or not change anything at all.
They put themselves in that box. They say don't vote, and then they don't
Oh,
do anything outside of not voting. Apart from like some, I have plenty of respect for all the like anarchist people or other people who do their mutual aid organizations or who do their protests and everything like that. But for the most part, the people I'm engaging with in my sphere online, they put themselves in that box. They say don't vote, but they also, what else they do? Join the American Communist Party and go to Cuba for a week. Like, yeah.
well, I think the point there would be to provide alternatives. And granted, providing alternatives to the Democratic Party is a little bit different. But with something like Food Not Bombs, right? Like the idea is to be on the ground and engaging with your community by providing what they need directly to them, kind of like a form of direct action, as opposed to waiting for politicians to solve hunger in their communities.
It's not it's not necessarily mutually exclusive, though. I mean, I one of my last relationships with a Food Not Bombs organizer. That person voted. They voted, but they also did the things that they felt that governments were a little bit behind on. Yeah.
I don't know if I agree, actually. Like, that person's personal choices are their own. I'm not going to criticize them for that because I don't know them. But personally, I think if you're voting in a candidate who will get in the way of Food Not Bombs, then you've just shot yourself in the foot.
Well, that's the point, though, is that in the UK we had choices between SNP ministers or Conservative ministers in Scotland. Conservative ministers were backing anti-protest bills that would have made the lives of Food Not Bombs activists much more difficult. Food Not Bombs activists under a Conservative government pushing through those anti-protest bills is much more likely to get harassed by the police. It's more likely that a cabinet minister might actually come in
I
and
see.
say, I consider this protest to be a violation of public order unilaterally, and you just have to clear them away. So,
Okay, fair. And UK is a bit different, and I'm not trying to say oh, it's so different that it can't matter. I think my contention is more trying to affect change through who we vote. When at the end of the day, if voting Democrat or Republican mattered, we would have seen more progress in Israel v. Palestine right now because we've had both.
Not necessarily. You can have one who's doing damage and one who's just doing basically nothing. Trump did a lot
And
of damage. Like things did change under Trump for Palestine. They changed for the worse.
and can voting for moderates that are on the same side of the aisle as you be damaging?
Um, in what way? Maybe if there's an example you can give me.
Well, if you have a movement and it say like perhaps it intimidates moderates a bit because it makes people question what they're really doing up there. And then, they realize, like, say you're Bernie Sanders, that you're about to get voted in, so they sabotage you.
I feel like I need specific examples.
Oh, Bernie Sanders.
Was Bernie Sanders sabotaged?
By his own party? Yeah. Is that
He didn't.
still up for debate?
I don't think it was up for debate. I think he didn't get as many votes as Biden. I don't think he had as much support as Biden did. I think there was Bernie and who was the progressive, and every other candidate was a moderate. The combined moderate vote was always higher than Bernie's. And when the other moderates dropped out, it was inevitable that those votes were going to go to the moderate candidate, Biden. Yeah. I think
Okay, so I'm
Biden did pretty
Canadian and
well in
you're
New Hampshire,
overseas.
and then he kind of overestimated his performance in like Super Tuesday. But yeah,
Okay, I'm Canadian, you're overseas. Let's not make a value judgment of who's more qualified and just say we're both technically unqualified here to make this call. But,
what
like,
was your claim? And you were laughing at the idea of it even being debated.
right.
Who's the
Sorry.
incompetent one now? Sorry, I'm joking. That was cheeky.
Yeah, no, it was good. I liked it, actually. But I think I don't think it's as easy to say like Bernie simply got more votes, because there were plenty of times along the way where Democrats could have played ball, could have had them at like their various fundraisers or facilitated him at the DNC, and they simply didn't.
What do you mean by that?
Well, you'd agree that like during campaigning, you need the DNC to kind of like help you along, right? Instead of like finding other candidates to win instead of you.
I don't know how that undoes the. I don't know what that means, but
That
yeah, I don't know
every
what you're referring
candidate
to.
who gets anywhere in politics under the Democrat banner gets the help of the DNC, because that's kind of what the DNC is there for.
Oh, but because Bernie was like more of a moderate and more of an outsider, he didn't have like the DNC's thumb on the scales for him, is what you're saying, or like they didn't support him in the same way
If
that they.
anything, they put the thumb on somebody else's scale to make sure he couldn't get in, and that was one of the things that was apparent. Him not. Now I can't remember if it was which DNC it was, but one of the DNCs around 2016 he wasn't allowed to speak at. It was a huge outrage. They did all sorts of things to try to ruin his momentum, because it wasn't about letting their best candidate win. It was about letting their most corporate candidate win, aka Biden.
I don't know what you're referring to. Are you talking about corporate? Because again, like part of wasn't also the problem with Bernie that he just wasn't able to secure support within the DNC? Because again, that would make sense. He was an outsider. He had been an
He had some of
independent.
the biggest rallies of that like any Democratic candidate has
Big
seen in a
rallies,
decade.
again, big rallies. Being a rock
That's
star,
support.
Trump has
That's
very
support.
big. It's a kind of support.
And
It's
Trump won.
against Biden. Trump always
Yeah.
had bigger rallies than
Well,
Biden.
Hillary, sorry.
No, but
won
yeah,
against
Trump
Hillary.
always had bigger rallies than Biden, but Biden won. Rallies is just a type of supporter. Yeah, like you're more of a rock star, sure. But
I don't think
at the end
Trump
of the
would have won
day,
if that was his first year, though.
hmm?
Or I don't think he would have lost if that was his first year against Biden.
Okay, that's like just a speculation. That doesn't really add to the conversation.
I mean, we're doing forecasting, right? We're trying to look at the variables and see what's happened in the past and try to apply it to the future.
So
This is exactly what you've been doing with how to solve the Israel-Palestine thing. Oh, well, Democrats care about the opinions of their voters. Mostly not true. So therefore, if we put more pressure on them with our voting, again, mostly not true, then they'll do better with Israel v. Palestine.
well, I don't think voting or not voting doesn't actually put pressure on Democrats. I don't think. I don't think I've seen
so
any
like
indication
running
of that.
third-party candidates or new Democrats against the establishment Democrats is actually what puts pressure on them. So we should be
Yeah,
finding new candidates who actually are more like Bernie, and then trying to make them as viable as possible.
you can try and find that person, and if they can meaningfully challenge Biden in a primary, then sure. But yeah, those people don't exist. So
Well, one of the first steps
Like
is
I would have
not
supported
saying,
Bernie in a primary, of course. Yeah.
okay, yeah, me too. One of the first steps is not throwing our hands up into the air and saying, well, I guess the corporate Democrats have it all like, bought up, and we just need to vote for them now. Like, no,
No, I
we
don't
need to
think the
start
corporate
thinking
Democrats
outside of
have
the
it. I
box.
don't think the corporate Democrats have it all bought up. I think those Democrats are the ones who are the most popular. Like their policies seem to match the most with the public that they're aiming for, like the American public.
So why aren't we strategizing to make sure their next candidate is an absolute flop?
Why aren't we?
Yeah.
You want the corporate Democrats candidate to be a flop?
Yeah, because I want whatever the left pushes, the fringe left, as an alternative to have a better chance.
Even if it means a Republican getting in? Because that's the risk.
Okay, well, let's be clear what we mean by getting in, right? Because if this is just the presidential debate or election, then yes, it's zero sum. But if we're talking about incrementalism, then we're talking about starting local and working our way up.
Yeah, so what if there's like someone like the Squad, like if someone like tries to primary, like say if like a more right-leaning Democrat gets challenged by a more progressive Democrat in a primary, yeah, you should probably vote for the one you prefer, which would be the progressive Democrat.
Right, but I'm saying, like, if you want to solve IVP, especially in the future, not just immediately, then you need to start finding candidates that people can actually vote for as alternatives instead of hand waving. Because I think saying like, oh, well, this candidate's better, so clearly just go vote for them, otherwise you don't care about this issue, is incredibly dismissive, and that's exactly what disenfranchises
Well, wait,
voters.
we're talking about the presidential election. That's what I was talking about. If we were talking about a particular primary where I think there's a candidate who's better in Israel-Palestine than the incumbent Democrat, then I would say support them. I'm not against doing that.
Okay, so let's say like I actually consider like the drilling of oil in America to be one of the worst problems, worse than IVP because I don't live there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so as an American, and this is just hypothetically, I kind of care about them drilling in my backyard more, and Biden doesn't do anything to stop that. So my question would be, why do we expect that person to care so much about IVP that they suddenly vote, right? Because this is what I mean about single issue voters and why I think your logic is flawed.
My logic that you made up, by the way, I was addressing that video to people who believe that Trump and Biden are the same on Israel-Palestine. I'm not addressing single issue voters necessarily. Some of them might be. I'm not telling people who don't care about
I shouldn't
IP.
keep using that.
Yeah, I'm not telling people who don't care about IP to make it their single issue. Obviously not. That would be insane. No, so I'm not doing that. As for what was your other argument about? I'm pretty sure agricultural investment, which was a lot of, or green investment, a lot of which was frozen by Trump, was resumed by Biden as well, and also increased. I think, is this not actually? There's one kind of
No, but
green
he's
energy
also
that.
accelerating drilling in a lot of places.
Hang on, where is the? Well, I have.
All I'm saying is that there are going to be people who, because Biden did something really awful to them specifically last term, can't imagine voting him next term. And if we lose the election, part of that is because we didn't primary a better alternative.
This is the first
I don't
time.
recall if you can primary a recumbent president.
What, like you can't primary a president who's in for their second term?
Can you? I don't remember.
I have no idea.
It's
I'm pretty sure
in
so because of a lot of projects that Trump just kind of abandoned and then came back under Biden. I think this is the first time ever in American history when electricity from renewables has surpassed coal for the first time since 2022.
That's interesting. It makes sense.
Yeah, it's like, but this is the thing is like, I feel like you're the incompetent one. You don't know the details of any of these issues. You're just kind of like going off of things that I have to double check all the time. Yeah,
I'm not trying to make political forecasts and prescriptions as much. In fact, if anything, I'm trying to say be more careful, because when you start thinking of voters as being like, oh, well, if I say who's better at Israel v. Palestine, that helps Democrats. My problem is like, we on the fringe left are not providing enough alternatives, and therefore any prescriptions we make are and this, like, maybe I was projecting this onto you, so I apologize if I was, are kind of incompetent because we're not providing those alternatives.
How would you want the left to bring those alternatives, run candidates, or to have protest groups that just happen alongside the electoral process? Or I mean, there's loads of things people can do.
Yeah, well, exactly. It's not mutually exclusive.
hmm
And I think like it's one of those like all we can do is everything kind of deal. And we need to be coordinated and we need to not step over each other, of course. But it feels like we're almost not doing anything at this point. I know that's not true. It's just that the people who are doing stuff aren't getting attention for it. But I think the fact that they can ignore us, the fact that the majority of us are just trying to maintain our own internal stability, means that what those people are doing is almost like not. I don't want to say it's a lost cause, but I mean we're kind of throwing them under the bus by ignoring them and just saying like, oh well, it's either vote or don't vote.
I would never say it's vote or don't vote. Thankfully I never have. I think
I've had to reconcile my own anti-electoral views over the past year or so, by the way. So this is kind of a new take for me.
Okay. I can't remember what state it was. There was a state where there was a majority Republican Senate that actually voted down an anti-trans bill. And the only reason they did it was because the trans rights organization had spent the entire lead up to the vote talking to different legislators. Because again, these legislators work in public buildings. Anyone can go in and just say hi. And enough of them had done that they just kind of managed to, I suppose, humanize themselves or communicate their issues to those legislators. Was it Ohio? Was it? I can't remember. But yeah, but obviously that's things that people, obviously that would have been easier to do with Democrats in, but even with Republicans in, I think like people who want to push alternatives for particular issues is they can do that at the local level. And I feel like that's something I try to say as well. It's not just voting for your president. It's also like in any country, local power is very much up for grabs because people just don't use it.
Okay. Sorry for coming at you like that. I think I maybe did read it a bit too much into what you were saying as a prescription. So I apologize for coming at you so hard.
Cool. Okay. That's all right.
It makes a lot more sense to me now. So.
Okay. Is there anything else you want to talk about?
Do you ever want to debate on guns?
I'm too Scottish to have an opinion on guns. Like.
Oh, okay. I'm looking for someone to debate me on guns. But
what's your position on guns?
Just totally anti it. Like, might consider an alternative society where like guns are community owned and there's incredibly heavy regulation, but that's about it.
Oh, interesting. If you're around in the Discord, you'll probably find someone who wants to fight you on that. Maybe.
I am, yeah. So if anyone wants to fight me on it, just message me from Loner's Discord.
Okay. I appreciate you coming on. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right. Take care. Bye bye.
You too. Bye.